Hi everyone. Thanks for the clicker. It's a little bit loud, so we can turn it a little bit off. Thank you. So, hello everyone. My name is Vu, and I am the CEO and co-founder of a company called Avocode. And beside the fact that we really like avocados and guacamole, we've also built the tool that bridges the gap between designers and developers. And with this tool, we're helping thousands of companies around the world to turn their design to code faster. And that includes companies like Samsung, Avast, or Intel. And today, I came here to tell you our story about how it all started, how we came to build products for designers and developers. And it's called How Laziness Helped Us Create Better Design Workflows. You know, it all started almost 8 years ago when me and my two other co-founders, Martin and Peter, were just a small digital agency. I was the designer, Martin and Peter were the developers. And back in the days, every time I would finish my design works and I was supposed to hand it off to Martin and Peter so they could turn it into code, all I did was just sending them a Photoshop file. No specs, no prototype, no documentation, just a plain file. You guys deal with it. And each of our developers would buy their own license of Photoshop. Well, download it from the Pirate Bay. But you get the idea. Each of our developers would have their own copy of Photoshop, which they would use to access the design file and export all of the assets they needed for coding. And that's basically how our design handoff workflow looked like. And I know it was terrible, it sucked, but that's how it worked for most of the teams at the time. At that time also, skeuomorphic design was very, very trendy, and basically every designer was creating these kind of realistic designs with a lot of shadows, a lot of gradients, and so on. And at the same time, CSS3 started to become popular as well. That meant developers no longer needed PNG images to recreate these fancy UIs, and all they could use was pure code to describe shadows, gradients, strokes, and so on. And of course, we were doing designs like these, and of course, our developers wanted to use CSS3 as well. But the problem was that, Martin and Peter, our developers, weren't really that great with Photoshop, and it would probably take them too much time to figure out what kind of layer styles and what kind of values I use inside of my designs. So they actually asked me to write down a list of all of the elements and what layer styles I used, what values I use manually. And you guys know that I was really a lazy designer. Cleaning up my mess in layers was already enough. This extra work, really? So I asked, maybe you guys do it. Well, they didn't do it, and so I decided to Google if there was maybe a better way, a more automated way to do this. And there used to be a page called Forced. It was basically a community for designers and developers to share their interesting projects that they were working on. And something like Dribble maybe nowadays. And on Force, I found this post. It was a Photoshop plugin that could automatically turn layer styles into CSS3 code. And I thought, brilliant, exactly what I need. Where do I put my credit card? The problem was that this was just an image, not the real thing, so I couldn't really download it or use it. So I asked our team of developers, hey, do you guys think we could build something like this? Super easy, right? Translating stuff to different stuff. Wasn't that easy, but luckily our team said yes, and we basically built the first tool product for designers and developers. And this is a photo of us at an event here in Prague. After 48 hours, we built the first prototype of this product. And it was called CSS Hat, a Photoshop plugin that could automatically turn layer styles into CSS3 code. And let me tell you that this small plugin was really revolutionary at that time, because there were no plugins into design tools at that time, no ecosystem. And I'm really proud to say that our company was one of the first to pioneer and create one of the first plugins into Photoshop. And created sort of like a whole era of all other plugins into design tools. And second of all, the workflow still heavily depended on designers manually preparing things for the developer. So with this small plugin, really help designers and developers work a little faster. And I still remember the day when Josh Brewer, former head of design at Twitter, now the CEO at Abstract, the version control for designs, he tweeted that CSS Hat is really awesome and saved him so much time. So for us, it was really a success. However, a couple months later, Adobe came and added their own copy CSS feature. You know, a feature that any design tool or any design handoff tool have by default nowadays. But I think that CSS Hat was really one of the first attempts to bridge the gap between designers and developers. And it kind of changed the perception for designers and most importantly for the design tools. And they finally understood that the design file also needs to be accessed by the developer as well. And you know, it all started with me just wanting to improve my own workflow. And of course, we realized that this was not the only problem that needed to be solved in the workflow. So we actually went on to build 10 more Photoshop plugins under a brand called Source to tackle other problems like image export or code export for iOS. And although all of these products really help designers and developers work a little smarter, we're really just scratching a surface of a much bigger problem. Because design handoff was still tedious. And we felt that with every project we were working on. Now, developers were still forced to use design tools, even with our plugins, to get those data from the design. And just think about how a design file gets to the developer, right? What if the developer doesn't have the right tool to open that file? Should all developers buy and learn how to use design tools? Should all of them be on MacBook just because of Sketch? Well, of course not. And designers didn't have it easy either. They were still forced to manually prepare and redline designs for the developer. So, although design tools kind of realized that designs should be also accessible to developers, but the features that they offered at the time were really far away from what we wanted to build. And so we thought, okay, if design tools are not going to do it, maybe we can build something and make the workflow better. And this kind of how we came up with the idea, a solution of how the idea of building our product, Avocode. And you know, to build it in a right way, we've set out a couple of requirements that this product must have, a way we envision the product. And the first sort of like requirement that we've set out was to build one UI for the developer to get specs and image assets from the design. You know, one UI for all of the design formats. And if you think about it, developers hardly use 90% of features inside of Sketch. And all they really need to is access the content. So export images, copy text, styles, flows, and these kind of stuff. So that's why we wanted to build an interface, a read-only interface for developers to get data from the design. The second requirement that we've set out was to allow developers to export any layer inside of the design as an image file without forcing designers to prepare anything. You certainly know other handoff tools that are solving this problem by forcing designers to go through all of the layers and mark those layers as exportable. And if you think about it, that doesn't really save you much time, right? You still have to go through all of the layers and manually prepare those image assets. And what about when you forget that one icon? The developer will find you, bug you, eat you alive. You open that sketch again and find that icon, re-export everything all over again. So this was the second requirement. The third requirement that we've set out was to make Avocode fully cross-platform. And that didn't only mean creating an app that would be compatible on Mac, Windows, and Linux, but also allowing anyone to open a design file independently without using the design tool. So even developers on Windows could be able to open a sketch file. So this is how we kind of envisioned the product with these requirements, and we didn't really want to compromise on any of these requirements. However, as we started to build Avocode, we realized how hard this is going to be technically. You know, no one has ever built a product like this before, and only a few people know this, but Avocode was built almost 6 months before Zeppelin even existed. So this was really challenging for us, I would say. But after 12 months of coding and development, we were able to ship the first version of Avocode. And this is how it looked like. With this first version of Avocode, we've been able to meet the first two requirements. Building one UI for the developer to get assets and specs, and allowing them to export anything from the design without forcing designers to prepare anything. And the only requirement that we didn't meet was the last one, making Avocode independent from design tools. That meant that only designers were able to sync designs into Avocode using a plugin inside of Photoshop or Sketch. That means we were still dependent on design tools and certain operating systems. And to be honest, we're pretty much limited by the technology, because the only way to extract data from a design file was through an API provided by the design tool. So using a plugin was basically the only option. And often these APIs would get terribly slow and would break with every update of Sketch. You guys know, right? So unlike other plugin-based solutions, we've decided to build our own technology that would allow us to extract data from the design without being dependent on design tools. And it took us almost 2 years to build it, but last year in spring, we were able to ship this technology with a major update of Avocode called Avocode 3. And this technology basically allows us to break down all of the design formats like Figma, XD, Photoshop, Sketch, Illustrator, and translate it into our own universal file format, which we call the Octopus file format, which is basically a JSON object that is easily readable and accessible. And then our app then takes this Octopus file format and renders it for the developer exactly as it was created inside of the design tool, and the result is 99.9% rendering precision. And you know, thanks to this technology, we're able to build a product that we've envisioned, a first fully cross-platform design handoff tool. And this is how design handoff workflow looks like today with Avocode. You can start by creating a project. To make sure that your developers get the right units, colors, and these kind of stuff. You can choose from web, iOS, Android. Once you've created a project, anyone basically can add a design into Avocode by just uploading it. And that means even developers on Windows can open up a sketch file with Avocode. And we support all of the design formats used nowadays, so Sketch, Photoshop, XD, Illustrator, and Figma. And of course, we have plugins inside of design tools as well, so even if you don't want to leave the environment of a design tool, you can use our plugin. And I'm not saying that plugins are good or bad, they're just for a different workflow. For us, it's really important to support all kinds of workflow. And if your designs live inside of Dropbox, you can just pull it into Avocode with just a few clicks. And once your designs are inside of Avocode, developers can get anything from the design they basically need for coding. Everything is automatically generated for them. So, for example, copying code, just select an element, and you get CSS code, SCSS code, Android code, whatever the developer needs. And even copying distances is super easy. Cool thing is that you can copy distances and measurements from multiple elements at once. And of course, every layer inside of Avocode is ready for export into all kinds of image formats that the developer would need. And we know that the design is a continuous process and it's basically never done and it keeps evolving. And we have this kind of workflow also covered inside of Avocode. So anyone in your team can suggest a change by leaving a comment. Once you receive a notification, you can implement that change and resync it back to Avocode and will automatically recognize it as a new version. And replace it and notify everyone that there's a new version, and even you can go back in time, retrieve the older version and things like that. Now let's talk about prototypes inside of Sketch. Sketch introduced a couple months ago a feature that allows you to create prototypes right within Sketch, and even like XD, of course. And we have this kind of workflow covered inside of Avocode as well. And we're seeing that teams are more and more adopting prototypes right within design tools, and they no longer use tools like Marvel or InVision to create these prototypes. It works, it's really easy. If you have a prototype within Sketch, just sync it into Avocode, and will automatically display a play button for the developer, and anyone in the team can preview the design. So yes, this is how Avocode looks like today. And we really believe that designers should focus more on actually creating delightful user experiences rather than worrying about specs, redlining the design, exporting assets for the developer. And that's why we wanted to make designs more open and more accessible for developers. And that's why we wanted to automate the process as much as possible. And I'm really proud to say that we're doing that through our product and technology. And looking back, it all started with me being a little lazy. It was quite a journey. So if you ever find yourself being lazy, think about it. You might be on a path of building a next successful company. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So Kuba here will come to you if you have a question. So does anybody have a question for Vu?
And for the question I like the most, I have this cute avocado.
Come on, good questions, please.
What are your next plans for new version, and when will be Avocode number 4?
Yeah, I think we have internally sort of like Avocode 4 sometimes in the second quarter. But in terms of like a bigger sort of pieces that we're working on is that we're making other like part of workflows stronger at Avocode. So Inspect is really strong compared to any other competitor right now. So collaboration, versioning is something we're working a lot on, and we are working a lot on design systems as well. We know that a lot of teams are adopting the workflows and using those, and we're seeing that there is not a really great tool so far that could actually understand both design and code. So we believe that we have the technology to make this a great product.
And one more question, but not on you, but on the people here who is using Avocode here. Can you put your hands up? Who is using Avocode?
Yeah, a few people. It's not free. I get it. No worries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Question back.
What was the biggest fuck up during your journey?
Oh, the biggest fuck up. Certainly a lot of fuck ups. The biggest one is, you know what the biggest one is actually, I keep coming back to that. We initially, when we launched Avocode, Avocode, we launched as a closed beta. So, just a few people actually testing it. And it was like, no, it's going to be private and it's going to be so exclusive. And then we released it, and not so many people tried it, and it was shit and, really bad. So, so that was probably one of the biggest fuck up that I would probably do differently, is do a public beta, which could be completely free, everyone using it, so you could get as much feedback as possible.
Thank you.
From the corner to the corner. Coming.
Hello. Hi, Wu.
Hi.
What an awesome presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question about a contract between Avocode and, for example, Avast or Intel, Samsung. What was the journey about it? Have you traveled abroad?
No, we have our strategy is a lot of like inbound. So customers are coming to us. We have great content. Big applause, I think, to the content team. Actually, they've been doing tremendous work on the content lately, and that content attracts talent. These companies, they read it, and then they eventually sign up for Avocode. So no, we didn't have to travel to Korea to talk to Samsung or to Japan to talk to Panasonic, and they basically just onboarded themselves, found out about the product themselves. So that's how it went. Of course. The process of like when they're a customer and want to grow within our product, that's a different story.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks.
It's working? Okay. My main problem, it's a little bit loud.
No worries.
Yeah, okay. My main problem isn't between the designer and developer. It's between designer and copywriter, because clients see images and text. Do you have some feature for copywriters to only like work with text, not like fuck up the design, only like change the text and stuff like that?
No, we have had a lot of discussion whether to build it or not, because we have the technology, but also quite limited. But there is an interesting company called Copy.io, something like that. They're doing that. I think you should check it out, and we might do it as well sometimes in the future. Not right now.
Thanks.
Questions?
Thanks. Hi, Wu. Over here.
Hi.
Hey. So my developer is using Avocode actually without me, so that's great. But my question is more about how hard it is to stand next to companies like, your competitors, and you said that you're not free, and in most cases they are. How hard is that, and what's your strategy, in marketing yourself?
Yeah, I would say that it seems like they're free, but at the end of the day, they're not free. It's basically the pricing is designed that well that it looks like free, but basically it's just a free trial. And one project, what can you do with one project, right? So at the end of the day, you will still pay for Zeppelin, InVision, or all these kind of products. And I do believe that Avocode is the best in our category of like inspect and handoff. And comparing to competing with companies like InVision is definitely tough, or Zeppelin is also, I would say, tough. But at the end of the day, if you have a better product, you have something you could offer to the end, more value you could offer to the end user. But the plan that we're sort of planning to do is what an interesting thing that the price, well, they have an interesting pricing basically, both InVision and Zeppelin, very similar. So you start very cheap and then you end up paying a lot of money if you're an enterprise. So that's, I think, a similar approach that we might take because it works.
Yeah, cool, thanks.
Should we have one more question for Wu?
Right.
Cool.
Cool. Thank you very much. You have a question, maybe? Just last one?
Oh, okay.
Maybe one more. I was wondering, the Avocode today, if I remember it right, doesn't allow to change anything. You can just comment, like positions, colors, and so on. And very often you can see comments like, can this be red, and so on. wouldn't it be possible or helpful to add some people to the possibility to just change the positions or colors, or just simply task or text?
I mentioned it in my kind of, maybe it fell behind, but we intentionally made it read-only because when we gave full access to the developer, to the design, and in the design tool, they would accidentally alter and change the design by pushing, buttons by few pixels. So intentionally, it's read-only, and the workflow that I would recommend using is maybe just having a design tool and resync it into Avocode for these changes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. I really like the fuck-up question, so the Avocode goes to you.
Congrats.
Thank you. I'll give it to you.